Settle in for this, Gary. I mean,
it's going to be a bumpy ride.
It's going to be a bumpy ride. My name is Darren Doane, and I'm a filmmaker, but I'm really a wannabe theologian, and I'm a super geek when it comes to the Bible and all things end times and the book of Revelation. And I had a chance to sit down with this man right here, Gary DeMar, and I truly believe he is, well, I'll just cut to the behind the scenes footage. We'll get the intro going. Here we go. Not every day you sit down and you start your day with, we're going to go through all of Matthew 24 and have who I think is probably one of the best exegete. Did you ever think you'd be called an exegete?
No, that's what the word meant.
Right. And maybe not to make him feel uncomfortable, so maybe I won't say the best exegete, but my favorite exegete on the biblical text of Matthew 24. I know that sounds geeky. I know that sounds like, what are you talking about? But look, understanding the Bible, knowing what it says, and the context that it was written in is huge. And if you get Matthew 24 wrong, you could end up having some very weird takes on just the world and how you understand the world, the things you see, how you interpret things around you. And so Matthew 24 is, I believe, just a monumental chapter to understand, to stay a very sane, focused, valuable Christian, in the sense that you want to be contributing to this world and making it better. And I think Matthew 24 is the key to understanding that. Here we go. And this is Matthew 24. Matthew 24 is, other than the book of Revelation, when people talk about the end times, things that are coming, things to be expected, Revelation is, in one sense, I mean, everyone knows that they're kind of going out on a limb with Revelation, and it's crazy, weird language. You've got dragons and women riding dragons, and you've got bulls and blood, and it's, you know, it seems even those who say that they've got it figured out would admit, like, okay, yes, this is going to take some work here, but you have to understand Old Testament prophecies and pictures, and it's a lot to unpack. And I'm not saying that Matthew 24 isn't equally, you know, in that category, but for some reason we don't think of Matthew 24 as being that complicated to understand, because Jesus is speaking, and he seems to be giving some pretty clear markers,
right, yeah,
for what appears to be the end of the world. And so Matthew 24, how have you seen Matthew 24 applied, let's just say, in your lifetime? Just kind of paint the picture.
Well, probably anytime there's a war that breaks out, people look to Matthew 24 as signs of the end. Anytime there's kind of a new kind of religious movement that takes place, Matthew 24 is appealed to. It talks about false prophets and so forth. Earthquakes, big time with earthquakes.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's markers that you mentioned, I think, are really important because they seem to be applying to our day, and yet every generation has taken some of these same markers and applied them to their day, and they came to the same conclusion that a lot of people are coming to today, that Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21 apply to this generation.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons people get kind of trapped in that rut is, number one, they've been told this over and over and over again by preachers and books and so forth, but also because they don't understand the broader context of what's going on here. You just can't parachute into Matthew 24 and strip it from what went before and what comes after and other places in the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament and isolate it from that. You have to understand the context in which it is written. And you make the good point that in the book of Revelation, there really isn't, there are a few historical markers, you know, the
right.
seven churches.
Right. But they're lampstands, and it's set up as a dream, and
symbols,
you can take it up.
signs.
And so, yeah, this is Jesus. He's standing in front of people, and he's given just a clear, you know, he's given a clear speech, statements on, you know, hey, let me tell you what's going on here.
But see, the telling is based upon questions that some of his disciples are asking.
Okay.
So he's just not sitting down and saying, hey, let me tell you a story. They're asking questions about something that took place just prior to this in chapter 23.
Okay.
So
we can't do chapter 24 unless we do chapter 23.
Right. And I believe you can't do chapter 23 until you do chapters 22 and 21.
Okay.
Because you go all the way back to chapter 21, and it sets the historical context. Matthew 21, verse 1, and when they had approached Jerusalem and had come to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples. So the Olivet discourse that we read about in Matthew chapters 24 and 25, the setup is all the way back in chapter 21. So we really can't dismiss everything that Jesus is saying in chapters 21, 22, and 23, because it is the setup for chapter 24.
Fair enough. So what do you want to highlight? So when you're talking about Matthew 24, what do you like to highlight starting with Matthew 21? Chapter 21. What do you try to kind of walk through to say, hey, let me set up 24 for you? What should people be looking at?
Well, the first thing we should look at is chapter 21, verse 12.
Okay.
And Jesus entered the temple and cast out those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables and the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den.
So let's just set this up. If we're watching a movie, Jesus shows up and he's upset. He's upset at his house.
Yes.
Right? This is his house.
This is his house.
This is his house. Which I always thought was really fascinating, right? I mean, it is almost like a Western, a guy that grew up in a town, right? It's his town. He gets exiled for some reason. And I imagine that, let's say he owned the town, right? But gets exiled. Comes back one day, right? And it's his town.
Yes.
It's his property.
He's the owner.
He's the owner, right?
They're squatting in his place.
So Jesus shows back up. This is his house. This is the house of God. And he shows up and he's upset by what's going on in his house. Fair enough setup?
Yes.
Okay.
And this imagery is borrowed from the Old Testament, because houses in the Old Testament that had leprosy or some sort of malignancy on their house, the high priest had to come in and evaluate that house.
Right. So Jesus is the high priest here.
He's the high priest coming in and making this evaluation. And then there's this cleansing that's supposed to take place. And then the high priest comes in again and makes an assessment. Okay. And if it hasn't been rectified,
okay, right,
with the hazmat suits and all that, whatever they used in order to do this, the house was torn down and the furniture and all that was just completely displaced.
Wow.
So
Jesus is acting as the high priest right now. He's coming in. He's saying, my house, this house is, first of all, you're squatting in my house.
Right.
Secondly,
with birds and other types of things. Just imagine what was taking, here's the...
so you got dung everywhere. You've got just,
who knows what was taking place with the Holy of Holies and the rest. This is serious business.
Right.
But this temple, what's taking place here, there were actually 2 visits by Jesus to the temple, and all people say, well, this one took place here and one took place there. This is a contradiction. No, if you know your Bible, the high priest comes in twice to make the evaluation, and this temple motif here is going to show up in Matthew chapter 24. Okay. So to understand what's going on, you have to understand this.
So we start in 21. Jesus shows up. He comes to his house. He says, it's been defiled.
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying by the time we get to Matthew 24 is going to be ultimately how Jesus says he's going to deal with this defiled house.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So where do we go next?
Well, the next thing is down in verse 18 of chapter 21, the barren fig tree. And a lot of people have trouble with this because it doesn't seem to fit the context at all. But the context is the story is moving forward.
Okay.
But no one really knows just exactly where it's going to be taken. So the next one is, now in the morning when he returned to the city, he became hungry, and seeing a lone fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it except leaves only, And he said to it, no longer shall there ever be any fruit from you. And at once the fig tree withered. And thinking, why would Jesus do this? And seeing this, the disciples marveled, saying, how did the fig tree wither at once? And Jesus said to them, truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you shall not only do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it shall happen, and everything you ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive.
So this...
The fig tree is going to show up again in Matthew 24 as well. And I think there's a link with this story and what takes place in Matthew 24.
But this is a classic moment, I know, as one who reads the Bible. It's really easy to just move through that.
Yes.
You don't really know what's happening, but you know what's happening. He looks at a fig tree, he curses it, it withers.
Yes.
Right? Like, so you know what's happening, but you don't really, it's weird. As James Jordan always said, when you get to the weird, you should stop.
Yeah, right.
You should stop at the weird and go, why are they not allowed to eat meat around the hip bone anymore? Like, why? Like, what? You know, there's no, like when you get to those passages.
Why can't you boil a kid in his mother's milk?
Right.
What does all that mean?
You should just stop and say, what is going on here? And to me, and we just kind of just move right by it. But you're saying this is still in relationship to the house, to the temple.
Yes, and this idea of this mountain that's here.
Okay.
You'll say to this mountain. Well, what mountain is he talking about? Well, that this is the mount where the temple is standing.
Okay.
And and again, so you say to this mountain be cast.
There's no other mountain to be pointing to in this area.
No,
there's hey, there's Mount Moriah or Mount Carmel. I don't know.
This mountain near demonstrative. Something that's very near.
Okay.
And this is the place. This is the mountain where God meets with his people. And Jesus.
Now, I was still always kind of told though that this was more of a verse about faith.
I think it is about faith.
Okay, but you're saying there's that because I was taught. Look, I mean, this is an example of Jesus saying that if you have faith, you can look at a mountain and say, "Hey, mountain, get into the sea." Now, no one's ever done that, which means no one's ever had that kind of faith, but it's a high bar that Jesus is telling you to attain to. We'll never really get to that level of faith because, again, no human on planet Earth has ever done that.
Right.
Maybe David Copperfield with the Statue of Liberty. Yeah, right. It's an illusion.
And everybody knows that's a trick.
And everyone knows it's a trick, right? But I always thought it was just, hey, it's a real high bar. It's kind of like when you say, you should live in such a way where you never raise your voice. That's probably not really going to happen, but it's a great bar.
Yes.
You're saying that's not what's happening.
I think what's happening here is going to be expressed in the rest of the New Testament.
Okay.
Because faith in what? Not just faith in general, but faith in what? Remember, with the temple, their faith was in that temple. Their faith was in that mountain. This faith is going to be redirected in the faith of a person who is in fact the embodiment of what that temple was.
And the Jews did consider the temple heaven and earth. I mean, they did consider that all of the world.
Yes,
right?
It's a representative symbol of what constituted.
Right. So their temple is a representation of the entire world, right down to how it's designed, the artwork, things that are engraved, painted, designed.
The garden is brought into the temple.
Okay.
It's an expression of God's restoration of what the fall was all about.
Right.
And for a Jew, and we'll see this when we get to Matthew chapter 24, when that was gone, if there was nothing to replace it,
right,
they were a lost people. But something is going to come to replace it, and that if you put your faith and trust in it, it's going to be transformational.
Well, then real quick though, but what's the fig tree? Why the fig tree?
Does
it matter?
I think it matters that. Well, I think this is representative. Trees in the Bible are representative of either blessing or cursing. You got the root of the tree.
Right.
The tree's putting forth good fruit, rotten fruit. It's representative of. It's a symbol of true life in Christ.
So
and so
it's
forth.
not that the fig tree represents Israel.
It might.
It might. Okay,
Yeah.
but then but I always thought it was more of the olive tree than the fig tree. Like, so to me, so you're saying it's not so much just that; it's just the fig tree. It's just that. I mean, you're saying the fig tree does represent Israel here, but but any tree in one sense could have represented Israel in this picture.
Yeah, this is actually a leaves only tree. This is a tree without any fruit on it.
Okay.
That's to me that's the important part. It's a leaves only tree.
Got it. Okay.
Sees leaves on a tree but no fruit.
Got it.
And when you get to Matthew 24, it's a leaves only tree. We'll see how that is interpreted by modern day prophecy writers.
Okay.
And it used to be that they would say that the fig tree in Matthew chapter 24 was Israel becoming a nation again. Well, they've gotten away from that because of this particular passage. This is a leaves only tree that's cursed. You get to Matthew 24, it's a leaves only tree.
Okay.
And then Luke adds it's not just the fig tree, but it's all the trees, which that's another parallel.
Okay, so we get to 21, Matthew 21, we get to 18 through 21.
Yeah, so now
this mountain we're talking about, you can say to this mountain, which I think is key, you're saying this mountain is Jerusalem. It's where the temple is.
Right.
So when he says you can say to this mountain, you would say you want people to think of he's pointing to the mountain with the temple on it. And you'll be able to say to this mountain with the temple on it, be cast into the sea.
Yes. And the book of Revelation has a lot to do about being cast into the sea, and sea is the time of judgment. But of course, then we know the rest of the Bible. Jesus is constantly calming the seas. I mean, he's fishing in the sea. So there are two of these things going on.
Okay. What's next? What
well,
next?
So you keep going through all of this. And Jesus is talking about the parable of the two sons. He's talking about there's the parable of the landowner.
So land, right? This comes back to, we talked about Jesus coming to his house, to his home.
Right.
All these are still pictures of thinking about land and landowners and a home.
And everything that was important to Israel at that time.
Okay.
And then you get to the vineyard. Look at verse...
Where are we at?
Let's see. About sending his son, verse 37, but afterward he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir, come let us kill him and seize his inheritance. And they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine growers?
So let's just again we're in Matthew 21. The picture we keep seeing is still about a home. It's about land. It's about a landowner who actually owns that land.
Talking about legacy and inheritance.
Right. And then the idea of the actual owner showing up, or the owner's son showing up.
I mean, if you don't get that,
right,
the owner's son shows up.
Right. And you're wondering, who's the owner's son?
We don't know who the owner's son is.
Right. So Jesus is the owner's son. He's showing back up to the land. He's showing back up to his house. And what are they doing?
Yeah, and they want to kill the heir.
Right.
Because they see him as kind of messing with the status quo at the time. Verse 41, and they said to him, verse 40, therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do with those vine growers? He said to him, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end, and he will rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper seasons. Jesus said to them, did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord and is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, not you, or us, you.
He's not talking to Gary. He's not talking to Darren.
Right. He's talking about them, you. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and be given to a nation producing the fruit of it.
Okay. So now we're back to the fig tree, or a leaf only tree that has no fruit.
Right.
Okay. Israel. Okay. He's calling them a leaf only tree that's not producing fruit.
A defiled temple.
Right. You've defiled my land, my home. And now I'm going to take everything away from you.
Yes.
Right. And I guess there's two ways to take something away from somebody. You either have to get them out of your house, off the land, or you could just destroy everything.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and be given to a nation producing the fruit of it. And
which, as Christians, we should understand that now we're transitioning from, let's say, Old Covenant language to New Covenant language that everyone seems to agree as, modern day Christians. Fruit of the Spirit. You want to be producing fruit.
Yes.
Right?
You can tell by
their fruit.
The healthiness of a tree by the fruit it bears.
Right.
And then in verse 44, and he who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter him like dust.
So now we have something being destroyed. We have stuff that's not only being destroyed, but it's falling on people and it's destroying people.
Yes. And this language is actually used in the book of Revelation as well,
Okay.
where people say, have the stones fall on me and so
Right,
forth.
okay.
Now we have evidence of who this is describing. Verse 45, and when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them.
Okay, so these are always great moments in the Bible when God's doing the work for us.
Yes, he's told us the context.
Right.
He told us the audience relevance. And when they sought to seize him, they became afraid of the multitudes because they held him to be a prophet.
So when it says they knew he was talking about them, this was the chief priests and the Pharisees. They knew he was talking about them, which means if we back up, the people who are going to be destroyed, the people who are going to have stones fall on them, the chief priests and the Pharisees said, he's talking about us.
Yes. He's not talking about all the Jews.
Right.
He's generally talking about those who reject him because, as we'll see in the book in chapter 24, Jesus presents a way to escape this destruction.
Right.
And you don't even have to believe in Jesus to escape the destruction. So it's the religious leaders. Throughout history, it's always talked about the Jews crucified Jesus. Well, the Jews didn't crucify Jesus. The ones who actually brought the indictment against him and offered false witnesses were the religious leaders of the day.
Right.
They saw Jesus as a threat, not only politically, but I believe economically, because if you usher in this new kingdom, their alliances and collusion with the Roman government. But that's a different story.
Sure,
so
but
they had a lot to lose, not just religiously, but also politically and economically.
But it's not so much a rabbit trail because what we just read was there's still a setup. There's people who have moved in and squatted on his property, and they've built alliances, and they've built an economic system on this land that is not theirs.
Yes.
With other people. They're buying and selling. They're trading, right? The religious leaders have a relationship in God's house with ungodly people, and they're making a living and they're getting wealthy.
Yes. And this might actually have something to do with Revelation 13 when it talks about buying and selling.
As I said it, I said, oh yeah, I've heard this term, buying and selling.
People think, this is going to be a one world currency, and da-da-da. You're missing the theological context of what's going on here. Why would you take that in Revelation 13 and transpose it into some distant economic stuff when you have the Bible here? That I'm not saying that is the case, but it's certainly an interesting parallel, exegetically.
And it's a little bit of a pause on this subject, but and it's not to say that we don't fall into this same trap today. People can get into all types of relationships and business deals, or and have kind of ungodly. I mean, it can still happen today. You could still be making money in the wrong situation and having the wrong connections, right? I mean, God still can,
Yeah, you make an excellent point, because a lot of people will say, well, if all of these prophecies have been fulfilled, what relevance do they have for us today? And
I'll tell you, you probably don't want to have relationships like this, right?
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Because if God is God, He's still going to want to discipline you in such a way to bring you out of stuff like this.
Yeah. So when people say that, I said, look, you can't make application from the Bible until you understand what it says and what it means. You got to get to the what it means point to make an application. So this context is very important for the modern church today. I think that's one of the reasons why 7 churches in the book of Revelation, if the book of Revelation is really about the lead up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
7 actual churches.
7 actual churches. And I think the reason for that is, and Jesus is harsh to some of those churches, essentially saying, if you act this same way, like Old Covenant Israel acted in the New Testament, same thing's going to happen to you. Paul writes that in 1 Corinthians 10. This was written for your instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come.
Right.
Learn the lesson of what happened to Israel. Learn the lesson is what's taking place here. This still has application to the modern church.
Which now now that really is a rabbit trail. But you made me think. I never thought about. We think about this old covenant, new covenant. Well, God deals this way in the old covenant, in a different way in the new covenant. But the 7 churches, He's dealing with them in an old covenant, almost an exact old covenant way.
There are sanctions in both covenants. Wow. A lot of people say we're under grace, we're not under law today. And
those 7 churches weren't under grace. The way people would use grace, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. Okay, so now that takes us to chapter 22.
It's the parable of the marriage feast, and here we have let's have this marriage feast. Ask the friends and all those to come in, I think representing Israel, and they're not interested, and said go on the highways and the byways and just essentially bring in everyone, which is what the book of Acts begins to show. This isn't an exclusive Jewish gospel message here. This is the message to the nations. I mean, Jesus brings the word nations in earlier.
And you have people who are lame, who are blind, who are sick, who are diseased. You have people who are who are eunuchs who, in one sense would have no value. They can't produce children or offspring, right?
And these were, if you go back to the old covenant, they were excluded from the temple. They were lame and eunuchs and so forth. This all changes in the new covenant. Jesus, you think about the miracles Jesus does, those miracles overturn the restrictive nature of those maladies that restricted people in the old covenant.
Matthew 22 verse 11 is where I get confused. So I track with all that, right? So the servants, I'll be back up to 10. So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Now I'm thinking, okay, this is the gospel. We're bringing everybody in now. No one's excluded. And to me, I feel like I'm tracking, right? And then I get to 11. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen." Kind of a bummer. I thought I was tracking. I thought I got it. Now I feel like the Gentiles and all the lame and the sick got invited in, but the lame and the sick weren't dressed right.
Well, I think this is a person who's dressing to. I think the dressing thing here is kind of a metaphor for the transformation of the heart. This is a person who was pretending to be saved. I mean, again, the New Testament talks about this.
And by the way, it is just a man, right? He noticed a man.
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting.
And John talks about there were those who were among us who really weren't of us.
Right.
So the idea of being clothed this way, Paul talks about to the Ephesian elders that savage wolves will come in, and Jesus talks about wolves in sheep's clothing, and I just think this is again just kind of a metaphor for somebody who is not transformational. They see the blessings of the covenant, but they're not willing to follow along with the blessings of the covenant.
So don't get sidetracked here trying to figure out like I did. I thought I had it. Oh, okay. This is I can understand that. Everyone's still going to come in, but there are still going to be some
imposters.
Right. So
look, now let's go back.
Well, it's interesting.
Verse 7.
But we think Israel is the one that's getting all the judgment, right? And then we go and get the Gentiles, and the Gentiles somehow get a pass.
Yeah, that's not the case.
Gentiles still don't get a pass.
No.
Okay.
In fact, Romans 11, hey, there's been judgment on Israel.
Right.
Don't you fall into the trap.
Right.
You're not anything special either.
Right.
Verse 7, but the king was enraged and sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. Again, this is looking forward to
chapter 22:7.
22:7.
Right.
Yeah, this is
the rest seized his servants, mistreated.
Yeah, this is another
right.
parable, but we miss this particular element because this is exactly what takes place with the destruction of Jerusalem.
Let's go back there.
70.
So Matthew 22:5 in this picture, but they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army, so now you have an army coming in, and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. When we get to Matthew 24, you're going to be talking about how you believe Matthew 24 is talking about the destruction of the temple. A temple where people are killed, armies come in, destroy murderers, and burn their city. And people are going to say, that's really a stretch, Gary.
Well,
and you're going to say, well,
the setup's here.
Jesus tells us that what's happening in this story is about an army coming in.
Yeah. See, look, this is interesting. Jesus is telling parables here.
Right.
These are symbols and parables. And as you move closer to chapter 24, Jesus starts getting very specific. We saw here about where the Pharisees and the priests said that Jesus was talking about them. And when you get to chapter 23, that whole chapter is about them. So when you get to chapter 24, now there are a couple of parabolic statements in there and some symbols in there, but this is a straight line historical prophecy about things that are going to come and things you're going to be able to see with your own eyes. This isn't something this is not all metaphorical. Right. Some very, very specific things are going to take place.
I think that's what's hard for us when we're reading the Bible. We think it has to be literal, or it has to be a metaphor, or it has to be dream imagery that maybe represents something over in the literal world, and we have hard categories.
Right.
And we say it's got to be one or the other, and yet everyone's views fudge somewhere to get what they want.
We've missed the meaning of literal. Literal means according to the literature.
So natural?
Well, it's just you got to look at the type of literature that you're reading and make a determination. There are going to be some things in here that aren't specifically physical. They may be representative of other types of things. I think the book of Revelation is like that at all. It's this very first verse talks about things that are signified, signified. These signs represent something else. But Jesus is going to get much more specific when you get to Matthew 23 and 24.
Okay. So we're still on this theme of the landowner or the landowner's son returning. People are squatting. They don't want him coming back because if he comes back, it's going to ruin their way of life, and they want to kill him.
Yes.
And they want to kill him. But Jesus is continuing to talk about, no, you're all going to actually die.
Judgment's coming.
Yeah, judgment is coming. Okay. Paying the imperial tax to Caesar.
Yeah, now we're beginning to see the setup that's taking place here on Jesus. They're beginning to set Jesus up.
Okay.
Which we learn about when we get to the trial. We got to figure out a way to get rid of this guy, and we can't do it ourselves. We need Rome to help us, and so now they're gathering evidence that they can use against Jesus when it comes to the trial for Pontius Pilate and the Roman Empire to get rid of Jesus. And we see this collusion in the statement when Pilate says, "Shall I crucify your king?" And they shout. Remember, this isn't Israel in general. These are the people who are setting Jesus up.
Right.
We have no king but Caesar.
Right.
They have now aligned themselves with Caesar over against Jesus. So we're seeing this the setup that's taking place here.
And just real quick, so Matthew 22:15 through 22, they're trying to catch Jesus in a trap.
Yes.
Jesus says that, right?
Yes.
He says, "You're just trying to trap me," because they're asking him, should we pay taxes or not? No one wants to pay taxes, right? Should we pay taxes?
And they were hoping Jesus was kind of a zealot, saying, "No, we're against Rome," and of course he is in one way or another. But look, this thing with the render under Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render under God the things the Caesar's that it has to render as well. And Jesus is basically saying, this is you. The reason you're in this position today is because of judgment, and you're under the heel of Rome because of your sins. Right. I've sent you into judgment under a temporal power.
So again, this is still the exact same story is being told here, because basically what he is doing with this coin is he is saying, you're squatting in my house and you have a relationship, an adulterous relationship with Caesar.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, he's saying,
you had a tax gatherer who was a Jew.
Right.
Think of that. I mean, Matthew, the tax gatherer, was a Jew. You had Zacchaeus, who was defrauding people. There's a lot of political and economic intrigue going on here as well. This isn't just about religion, although we begin to see in chapter 22 as we go through here that not only are they trying to trap Jesus politically, but they're trying to trap him religiously as well. You got different trials going on.
Sure. But let's just before we jump in, it ends with, then he said to them, verse 21, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. If we're following the story here, he's basically saying, give back to Caesar, which is, you're all going to die by Caesar. You serve Caesar.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, you could probably read.
Right, like if we're following this story, say, look, if Caesar's in charge and that's who that's who you're in bed with, all right, then you're going to give back to Caesar what is Caesar's. But if you want to give back to God what is God's, we're going to be getting out of this city.
That's a very good take on that.
Just to kind of stay.
I'm going to have to steal that. I wish I had. I can write that down.
It's okay.
I got it on.
It's on
tape.
video.
So, yeah,
it's on video.
Got it.
It's on video.
It's good.
It's on tape, Gary.
Yes.
It's on half-inch tape somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, we're seeing this all the way through. Right. The argument in the rest of chapter 22 is dealing with religious objections, because Jesus has numerous trials, and they've got to make their case religiously as well as politically, and so they're gathering this evidence against Jesus to indict him religiously and politically. And then chapter 23, it's just a straight-on line indictment of the religious leaders of the day.
So, and again, I think this is key, because this is this Matthew 23 always read to me now like a courtroom.
Yes, the charges.
The charges are being brought against the Pharisees. You cannot read Matthew 23 and not come away with, wow, Jesus
meek and mild.
Yeah, just loving everybody.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
He comes in, you wouldn't want your children to talk this way.
No, you wouldn't. No. I mean, no. It's just, it's characteristic of Jesus in his divinity. I mean, he is, we can't do this.
Right.
We can point these things out to people, but we don't have the authority that Jesus had to make these kinds of claims against them.
But again, he's talking to these people, and now 23 brings up what I think is the linchpin here. This generation. If we don't come to an agreement on what does it mean to say this generation, we're going to miss all of Matthew 24. Who is this generation that he is referring to?
Well, we haven't seen anything other than an indictment upon that particular generation. I mean, this is dealing with the people of that day, and we're going to, if you look at verse 31 with chapter 23, It says, after going through this indictment, consequently you bear witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. So you're just like the old covenant people who you say that you follow the prophets and so forth. Well, you don't. You're hypocrites.
Right.
Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers. This is the same thing that you see in 1 Thessalonians 2. You see it also in Acts chapter 7. This filling up.
Right.
You serpents, you brood of vipers, how shall you escape the sentence of hell? Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, which took place, and you can read about it in the book of Acts,
right.
That upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation.
Okay, so all this blood is being shed. And Jesus is saying, all this blood that's been shed on my prophets and my people, that a certain group of people within his people keep murdering, that someone's going to pay for all this. It's filling up. The cup is filling up. And when it gets full, it gets, I guess, poured back. It gets dumped, right? It's like
it's gonna,
all that blood.
It's going to spill over.
All that blood is now going to be put onto
that particular generation. And people say, well, why just this generation? Well, Jesus came unto his own, and his own knew him not. They should have known.
Right.
This is, they've filled it up. I mean, the things in the past, God looks over and passes over. But this particular generation, as Peter talks about in Acts chapter 2, I mean, they took the Lord of glory.
Right. So yeah, it's not just Moses. It's not just this prophet. It's now the Son of God, back to the beginning of what we talked about, shows up.
Yes.
The Son returns. Now they got no excuse, right? Okay, maybe we didn't understand John the Baptist. He was a little crazy and had weird dietary things and didn't shower.
Dressed funny,
right? I mean, so maybe you can misunderstand him because he didn't have a very gentle tone, right? But Jesus shows up.
He's the embodiment of everything
right.
The old covenant was reaching for and pointing to.
So if you miss this is why all the judgment now comes here at this moment in time.
And that now this is important for history. It was only this generation. There's a theological position today called dispensational premillennialism that sees a future for Israel during this great tribulation period, that 2/3 of them living in Israel during that period of time are going to be slaughtered. Why would God postpone its so-called blessing to Israel 2,000 years into the future?
Just to slaughter them. With no Messiah.
They weren't the ones that crucified the Lord of glory. They weren't. There was no generation beyond this that personally took Jesus and crucified him.
Right.
This is the only generation that was guilty. Accountable and guilty for what
and if God is
place.
Fair and just,
yes,
you have to have witnesses, you have to have, right? I mean, you have to have a crime scene with those who committed the crime and those who helped drive the car.
Yes.
You need witnesses, you need all of this working together for God to be fair and just.
Right. It was only this generation that was under judgment. And unfortunately, throughout history, the Jews have been liable supposedly for the crucifixion of Jesus. Well,
right.
that's just unfounded when you read the scriptures. It was that generation and a very tiny segment of that generation that actually worked for the indictment and the execution of Jesus.
Well, what did they say? Remember when Jesus is on trial? What did the people there say? May the blood of this man be on us
and our children. But I think that's
their
generational.
Children. That's just one generation.
Yes, exactly.
So it's the adults saying, "Hey, let it be on us and our kids."
Yes, and of course, 40 years later, with the destruction of Jerusalem, their children would have been adults.
Right.
And again, God in His mercy, first of all, he says, this is what's going to happen. Lays out all the details, gives all the instructions, and says when you see certain things happen, the way you can escape this, just leave the city.
Right.
And you'll be fine. But there were lots of people who just didn't want to believe, and as a result stayed there, and they ended up coming under the judgment.
So that's Matthew 23.
Now, it's important that we understand the end of Matthew chapter 23 because it explains the questions that are going to be asked in chapter 24 by his disciples. Remember, his disciples must have been hearing all of this from chapter 21, 22, 23. They were there. They heard this and probably sitting back thinking, "Yikes!
Right.
This is heavy in terms of what this judgment is." And so in verse 38 it says of chapter 23, "Behold, your house is being left to you desolate."
Right. So after all of that, we're coming back to the house that we talked about in the very beginning.
Yes.
You're squatting in my house. You've set yourself up.
Yes.
Basically as God. You've set yourself up in my house as one who's in charge of everything. You have a relationship with Rome, Caesar, all of this. Everything's polluted. You think you're the ones that can offer, all the sacrifices, but it's all defiled. Everything's defiled. You're brood of vipers, which is a pretty heavy statement.
Yes.
To be a brood of vipers means that you're a child of a serpent. Right?
Takes us all the way back to the very beginning.
All the way back. You are a child of Satan. And he says this is a synagogue of Satan. He's looking at his house now, which is impure, needs to be cleansed, needs to be burned down because it's a sin. I just don't think there's enough cleansing material for the synagogue of Satan. Right? There's no... He's checked, he's double checked. It's all got to come down.
And a new temple will replace it, but that temple is Jesus himself being the chief cornerstone, and we're built up in that temple as well.
And every Christian believes it. Every Christian believes that we are the temple.
Yes.
I mean, every Christian believes that. So I think the question that needs to be asked is, well, how did we get to all of us being the new temple? Right? Well, you got to get rid of the old temple. It's defiled. But he ends right here, Matthew 23, verse 38. Look, your house is left to you desolate. That's the temple. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
It's a profession of faith. You'll never see me again until you say this. If you don't say it, you'll never see me. It's pretty clear Jesus is saying here, I'm the focus of history now. The temple isn't the focus of history. The animal sacrifices aren't the focus of history. I'm the focus of history.
And when he says, look, your house is left to you desolate, he's also about to leave the temple. Or is he in the temple? Is he not in the temple right now at this point?
Well, the next chapter 24, verse 1 tells us.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Jesus left the temple. So Matthew 23, he's in the temple.
Yes.
He's making... that's the indictment. Here's the charges.
Yeah, think about all that. I mean, this is he's on a stage in essence.
Right.
I mean, everything that is important to Israel at this time, Jesus is center stage when he's saying all this stuff.
And he's in his own house.
Yeah.
He's in his own house that people are squatting in saying, who do you think you are? I mean, I keep coming back to that because if I ever came home, there are a bunch of losers in my house squatting with fecal matter everywhere and food and wrappers. And they looked at me and said, well, who are you?
Who are you? Yeah, right.
I say, well, you're in my house.
I've got the deed right here.
I bought it. I'm actually still making payments. And they say, get out of here. Not your house. And then you kind of go to get them and all of a sudden they bring 10, 15, 20 people and they're a little bigger than you. And they're going like, you going to kick us out?
Yeah.
And then I walk out of my own house and I say, okay. Then I go get a surface-to-air rocket launcher and I blow my...
Well, that's exactly what happened because we're back to 2146. When they sought to seize him, they became afraid of the multitudes because they held him to be a prophet. They wanted to get rid of him right then and there, but they knew that they weren't going to be able to do that.
So he leaves. So now this is the setup. This is Matthew 24. Now, I grabbed my daughter's Bible because I just wanted to I didn't want to get some fancy New American Standard Smarty Pants, version. I just grabbed my daughter's Bible and it's just the NIV, so it's got a
pretty Bible.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Nice color.
It's clearly not trying to be fancy. You know, it's cute and it's fun. And I open up Matthew 24, and that's the NIV, and the header here says, "The destruction of the temple and signs of the end times." So even the simplest, I say that because the NIV, you know, it's a simple. It's not trying to be super Oxford or whoever does this now and claims to be the best translators of Greek and all that. It says the destruction of the temple.
Yes.
So would you say historically people have still understood this? This is kind of about the destruction of the temple in some way, or have we gotten, or no?
This is about the destruction of the temple.
Right, but if people always...
Oh, Old Testament commentators were pretty unanimous on this. Jesus is describing the destruction of the temple that took place within a generation, that every history book that's ever been written that during this particular period of time knows that the temple was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. And if you go to Jerusalem today, there is no indication there was ever a temple there. They'll say, well, the Wailing Wall, that had nothing to do with the temple. I mean, just like Jesus will say here, not one stone was left upon another. They were all torn down, and that took place within a generation, almost specifically within a 40-year period after Jesus gives this prophecy.
Okay.
We stop here and maybe have a little break. And
I think so, because this is,
it's a good stopping point.
This is a great stopping point. We're about to enter into Matthew 24. So, all right, let's take a break and get ready.
All righty.